So good morning and welcome. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to our Sunday celebration for the Center for Spiritual Living, Space Coast. And if there's anybody watching that has never been to a Center for Spiritual Living, we believe there's one God, many paths to that God, and we're here to love, honor, and support you, no matter what your divine path is. And the Center for Spiritual Living, Space Coast is a safe haven for people of all beliefs and lifestyles, whoever you are and wherever you may find yourself on your journey of faith. You're welcome here. And this morning, to begin our service, my wife Becky, who's a practitioner emeritus, is going to open us with a prayer and then with a spiritual reading.
So I just invite everyone to turn within to that place of the Most High. Just knowing that this infinite power is right here, right now. And I'm knowing my oneness in this infinite space, this infinite love that is always surrounding me, always embracing me, always within me. And I'm knowing this for each person who is with us this morning. That right here, right now, that love encompasses each one of us. That as this morning unfolds, it unfolds in divine perfection. This wonderful infinite love is guiding and directing Reverend Ron and his message this morning. And as we open up to it and allow it to sink into our consciousness, we open up our minds and our hearts to it, to this message. To this message of being human, the love and the forgiveness that we give to ourselves. And so, knowing this, each one of us just moves forward into who and what we truly are. This wonderful divine gift of life. And so I just give thanks. I release this and just know that it is done. And so it is. Being human, we will occasionally suffer a loss and encounter pain. It's all part of the package. However, as Peggy Bassett, my first minister, often said, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. This article was written by my wonderful husband, Reverend Ron. He goes on to write, what matters most is what we do with our pain. We can learn from it, become more compassionate, and even become more humble. When we use our disappointment as an opportunity to learn rather than wallowing in our hurt, we empower ourselves. We take charge of our lives and move beyond victimization to a place of strength. Ernest Holmes reminds us that it isn't always easy to hold our mental attention to an ideal while our experience is discordant, but it is possible. Perhaps the most difficult situation to deal with is when we fail to live up to our own standards. It's in these moments that we really need to be gentle with ourselves and begin the practice of forgiveness. When we can forgive ourselves, we begin a healing process that leads to spiritual growth. When we release all of the judgments and accept that we're not perfect, every experience can lead to a closer walk with divine spirit. So today we can choose to see ourselves as vital, confident, and powerful. As humans, we possess unlimited potential. Our own belief systems are the only limits that keep us locked in dissatisfaction. And so when we develop new beliefs, life flows more smoothly.
Thank you, Beth. So this morning, I've titled the message "Being Human," and I want to speak on this because I know how many people are having difficult times right now and are hurting for different reasons. And so what I'd like to do is really go through with some of our thinkers, modern day thinkers in New Thought and spirituality have to say about our being human and dealing with personal tragedy and pain. So I want to begin with a quote from the psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she wrote, "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding that life fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen." I really love that last line. Beautiful people do not just happen. One of my favorite New Thought writers is Kent Norburn, and he writes that tragedy and suffering will come. We can't insulate ourselves from them, and we can't avoid them. And he said, how you respond to tragedy and suffering is a measure of your true personal strength. And he said, we should see them as moments of growth and even see them as a gift that's here to help us reclaim and know what's important in our life. And he goes on that we shouldn't fear tragedy and suffering because, like love, they make us more a part of the human family. So, Rabbi Harold Kushner has written some wonderful books. And in one of them, he writes about wholeness. And I want to share some of what he wrote with you. And he begins this particular chapter by discussing a piece that Shel Silverstein wrote titled "The Missing Piece." So let me fill you in on that. So the missing piece is about a circle that's missing a piece. A large triangular wedge has been cut out for him. And so as he travels along, this circle wants to be whole. So he searches for the missing piece. And along the way, he tries out a number of different pieces and none of them work. But one day, he finds the piece that's missing and it's perfect. And he puts it in and he starts to roll along. And he rolls, but he finds that he's rolling too fast. And he doesn't have time to stop and say hello to his friends, the flowers and the worms and the trees. And he realizes that his life with the piece isn't what he thought it would be. So he stops along the side of the road and he takes this piece out and he continues along his journey. And the rabbi says that the lesson in the missing piece is that in some strange way, we're all more whole when something is missing. He said, the man who has everything will never know what it feels like to yearn, to hope, to dream of something better. He said, there's a wholeness about a person that can come to terms with their own limitation. There's a wholeness that comes to a man or a woman when they learn that they're strong enough to overcome tragedy and survive. There's a wholeness about somebody who can lose someone and still feel like a complete person. Excuse me. He said, when we accept our imperfections as part of being human, will achieve a wholeness that some people can only aspire to. And he goes on, he said, God doesn't expect us to be perfect. God doesn't expect us to never make a mistake. God expects us to be whole. And he finishes this particular piece. Let me quote him. He says, and at the end, if we're brave enough to love, strong enough to forgive, generous enough to rejoice in another's happiness, and wise enough to know there is enough love to go around for us all, then we can achieve a fulfillment that no other living creature will ever know. Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Centers for Spiritual Living, reminds us that St. Paul said that no matter what trials, no matter what tribulations we endure, or how serious our errors, there's a light within us that leads us back to the central flame of our being all the time. So I've spoken about Pema Chodron before. She's a Buddhist nun. And she writes that every day, every day, we're given opportunities to open up or to shut down, especially when we come to a place where we think we can't handle what's happening. We've reached our limit. And she said, we all have different limits. She said, she has an aunt whose limit is when Pema comes to her house and moves one of her aunt's lamps from one place to another, that's her aunt's limit. She has a friend whose limit is whenever she has to move. Somebody else she knows is afraid of heights. The point is that sooner or later, it happens to all of us. And we can meet our match with a guard dog, or we can meet our match with a poodle. The question is, what happens next? What happens next? The spiritual journey is about going beyond hope and going beyond fear and stepping into the unknown and moving forward. Michael Beckwith, in his book, Spiritual Liberation, I think most of you know Michael is the founder of Agape. He said that accepting our perfectly imperfect self is an inside job. And he said, when we seek a spiritual path because it will fix us, it's just another gimmick to move beyond the ego that's always whispering, you're not all right. You're not all right. When we move through life with the consciousness that says, I'm all right already, we realize that we aren't moving from a state of imperfection to perfection or incompletion to completion. Instead, we're moving from one point of development to another. Our inner self is already perfect, no matter what we're experiencing on the outside. Rachel Remen is an MD who writes on spiritual topics. And in one of her books, she says that one of the blessings of growing older is that what she once believed was a shortcoming, she now realizes is a strength. And what she was once proud of, the things she was once proud of, she realizes are shortcomings. She said things that she had hidden from other people for years turn out to be an anchor and an enrichment in middle age. And let me quote her. She said, "What a blessing to outlive your self judgments and harvest your failures." So Jack Kornfield is a psychologist and a Buddhist teacher. And one of the books he's written is titled After the Ecstasy, The Laundry. And in the book, he talks about when he first went to the monastery in Thailand. And after he was there a week or so, they told him, you've got to bow to everybody who's your elder. And since he was the newbie, everybody was his elder. So he had to bow to everybody. And he said, there were some people he was glad to do it to. There were some really wise and spiritual people in the monastery. And he said, with some people, it felt ridiculous. He said there were some 20-year-olds there that were filled with hubris and who were there probably because their family wanted them to be, not because they wanted to be, and because the food was better in the monastery than they could have at home. And he said there was a farmer who was there because he was retired and who probably hadn't meditated a day in his life. And he said, so it was really difficult to revere these people. So he began to look for some worthy aspect of them that he could bow to. So he bowed to the wrinkles on the farmer for the difficulties that he had experienced and had managed to overcome in his life. And he bowed to the vitality and to the playfulness of the 21-year-olds and to the fact that their lives were young and filled with potential. And Kornfield said the true test of spiritual life asks us to welcome all that life presents to us with a wise, a respectful, and a kind heart. He said, we bow to beauty and we bow to tragedy. We bow to suffering. He said, when we bow to life's sorrows, we discover that life is still workable. And when we realize, excuse me, when we realize that our heart holds more compassion than we ever believed that it did. And he said, there's a wisdom in ecstasy and there's a wisdom in laundry. Eric Butterworth, the late wonderful Unity minister, wrote about Jesus. And he said that Jesus challenges all of us to look at ourselves in the context of divine potential. He said life is consciousness, and what matters isn't the people or the situations or the conditions in our life, but the thoughts and the feelings we have concerning them. He said it isn't the conduct of others, but our reaction that make up the experiences of our life. So I want to end with a story that I found this week in a folder that I don't often look at. And it was sent to me 20 years ago. An email was sent to me by a minister friend, Catherine McDowell. And the story is about a man who's parked in front of a mall. He's waiting for his wife to get out of work. And while he's waiting for her, he's wiping down his car. And he notices a homeless person. And he thinks to himself, oh, I just want to be left alone. I hope this guy doesn't come over to me. And I just want to be quiet. And sure enough, the homeless fella starts to walk in his direction. And the fella thinks to himself, oh, I hope he doesn't ask me for money. And the homeless guy doesn't. He just sits on the curb and he doesn't say anything. And after a while, he says to the fella, that's a really pretty car. And the guy says, thank you. And he hears a voice that says, ask him if he needs any help. And he kind of doesn't. And finally, he gives in and he turns to the homeless fellow and he says, do you need any help? And he wrote that he responds with 3 words I'll never forget. He said, don't we all? The words shook him. Don't we all? He said, no matter how much we have, no matter how much we accomplish, we all need help. Someone may appear to have it all, but maybe they're waiting for you to say something that only you can say, something about what they don't have. Perhaps a new perspective on life or a respite from daily chaos that only you can see. And he said, so maybe that man was just a harmless, homeless person. Or maybe he was more. Maybe he was sent by a wise power to minister to a man who was too comfortable with himself. Maybe God looked down, called an angel, dressed him like a homeless person, and said, go minister to that man cleaning his car. He needs help. Don't we all? Hope you found this message helpful. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. And thank you for being here this morning.